So, I wanted to do a very short and simple video this morning. Hopefully it will be shorter and simpler than my last video because that turned out to be the longest one I've done yet, and I haven't had my caffeine yet this morning, and I'd like to go to my local coffee shop and drink a coffee soon, so I certainly don't have an hour plus in me, and this one I really intend to be fewer than 10 minutes, I would say. The topic I want to cover today is judgment, and I have two associated questions, and again, they're very simple. One is, what is judgment? And two is, why do we judge? You'll notice that many religious and spiritual traditions are rife with admonitions not to judge, to stop or at least watch judgment closely. In Christianity, we have the injunction, judge not lest ye be judged. We also have Jesus saving Mary Magdalene, I believe, and saying, let he who has not sinned cast the first stone, which is a reminder that no one would be in a state above judgment. In Buddhism, we have the idea of compassion, the centrality of that, which again prevents us from placing ourselves above others. We have cautionary tales about ego in New Age traditions, which to me tend to be aggregates or distillations of religious teachings. So again and again we see this theme of judgment associated with sin or damnation or whatever the more secular version of those concepts becomes. And we see these sort of cautionary tales or reminders to followers not to judge. And I know a lot of people who try very hard not to judge, and it's very difficult to overcome, and I want to talk about why that is. Because what I don't see in the teachings, at least as I've described them so far, is a recognition of the impulse that animates judgment. What is it that keeps us judging others, even when we know or when we've been told it's wrong? It's a very strong instinct. We keep doing it. Why is that? So, I'll talk first about what judgment is, how it functions, and then I'll get into the reasons why. And I want to note before even setting out on this phase that in this video my intention is not to give you a toolkit for how to stop judging. I'm not saying I've figured out how not to judge people, and you can too. That's very much not the intention of the video. The intention of the video is more to help us understand where judgment comes from in a sympathetic way, so that we can cease to judge ourselves for judging. And as with most things, this paradox is sort of the impasse or the gateway to a different plane of being, where different questions, new questions, present themselves. And it's no longer judging is bad, how do I stop judging, but a different life circumstance altogether. really want that coffee. So, question 1. What is judgment? Or how does judgment function? And this will lead us into the second major question of why do we judge? So, I'll give an example. And with each example, I'll demonstrate the mechanism at play, and pretty soon you'll see what's going on. So, let's say that I say someone else is ugly. That person's ugly. Well, what quality do I necessarily have to possess in order to be able to make that judgment? If I were similarly or equally ugly as the person I'm judging, how would I be able to identify that quality? There must be some difference. And not only difference, but I alluded to this earlier, there must be a hierarchy. In order for me to be able to see, to identify, to name that that person is ugly, I must be good looking. Contrast is necessary. And what the judgment serves to do is turn the contrast into a hierarchy so that my physical features become more highly desired than those of the person I'm judging. The same is true if I call someone else stupid. And these are very crude examples that I'm using now. Most often judgment is a lot more sophisticated, a lot more sinuous than this. These examples are coarse to make them visible, but indeed most of our thought and most of our speech is operating with judgment, or rather judgment is operating through it at some level. So if I call someone else stupid, what quality must I possess in order to be able to make that determination? Of course, I have to be more intelligent than that person. And in fact, a sort of conversion or transformation takes place through the judgment. As they become stupid, I become smart. The contrast renders each of us with these categories, or as embodying these categories. When I call someone poor, I become rich. When I call someone lazy, I become industrious. And so on and so forth. So, just to summarize this brief section, judgment is a distinction that makes a hierarchy of a difference. And even preliminary to that, it also isolates or focuses on a certain difference as noteworthy. So if you've ever seen the movie Brother from Another Planet, that theme is brought home in this movie. So there's I believe he's an escaped convict from another planet who's being pursued on Earth by these two men who look like the agents from the Matrix. These two, white men in suits, and the escapee is black. And on Earth, when his pursuers are describing him to someone in a bar or some passerby on a street, whomever, to see if they can get aid in finding him, they always say he has 3 toes. He's one of those 3-toed bastards. It doesn't occur to them that a noteworthy difference between them and the escapee is skin color. That's an Earthling thing. is the movie's implication. And so similarly, a judgment first notifies us of a certain difference, says, oh look, you're white, he's black, or whatever the quality is, the gradient, and then makes a hierarchy of it. So it serves those two functions. Now, based on this dynamic, I think a go-to explanation of judgment is that it's essentially tribal behavior, which is a form of survivalism. So let's take one of my earlier examples. Actually, I'll use a different one because it's more easily demonstrative. So let's say I'm with a group of friends and I don't know, but I suspect that all of us have liberal political beliefs. And I describe someone in my family as conservative. That does two things. According to our paradigm already, it marks me as liberal by implication, because otherwise I wouldn't have even seen it as noteworthy or remarkable, deemed it necessary to say. Second, it bounds all of us in the group as liberals, fellow liberals, against this conservative being described. So, especially if it's a group that I'm newly coming to know and I'm not yet sure where I stand with this group, if I use an external characteristic, a them, to brand myself as a member of the group, my identity merges with that of the group and I'm no longer alone, I'm safe. I am a liberal among liberals. And that conservative is out there and has been used to prop me up. So, when I say survivalism, I mean I, as an individual, am more likely to have an enduring life if I judge others outside myself to fortify group identity, to make myself belong, because in belonging is safety, security, longevity. So I think that's a common supposition for why we judge. I note the difference and convert it into a hierarchy so that I may belong to a privileged group, and that makes me, as an isolated individual, feel safe. And I think that's part of the truth. But I also think there's something deeper. So, first a reminder here in order to ground this next bit of content. Are we, as beings on Earth, really individuals? In the sense in which we generally mean this term. That is, are we discrete? Are we separate? Do we pass into and out of existence in isolation from one another, without influencing one another? I feel the fairest answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I experience myself as an individual, I have an individual experience, an individual story that I work on. I have my own obstacles, my own themes in the narrative of my life. No, in the sense that all of us are influencing one another all the time in myriad ways too fast and too diffuse for the mind to track, and that prior to the emergence of any individual, we were unified as a oneness. And at a certain level of existence, that oneness remains the truth throughout the entirety of the individual lifespan. So even as I experience myself as an individual with a journey, the truth of my unity with all other beings, of the lack not only of hierarchy but of any distinction, that truth remains. That truth remains throughout the lifespan. I detailed this at length in my first video, which is called Peace, Love, and the Purpose of Existence. So in that video, the key realization for me is that we don't actually need to even experience these deeper principles like peace, love, or oneness in order to verify them. That is, they need no check from human beings. Even if the entirety of my life I am in states of anxiety, anger, depression, nervousness, longing, all of these very painful and contrastive states, the oneness remains the truth and persists underneath. And in fact, from a certain perspective, the purpose of my having all of those contrastive experiences is to illuminate the oneness, or the peace, or the love. It is almost as though this fundamental condition is the base of the ocean, that very still, very dark water, and the experiences we have throughout our lives are the contours of the waves. The waves are what the light shines through to illuminate the bottom. They refract the light. And from this perspective, that is the purpose of our lives. And so with judgment. That is the very simple teaching I seek to communicate in this video. Each time I judge another being, each time I discriminate between us, render a difference among us, and leverage it to form a hierarchy in which I can stand on top, I simultaneously individuate us as beings. I intensify the experience of our separation. The more I judge others as poor, stupid, lazy, ugly, all these characteristics I brought up at the beginning, and thus fortify or testify to their opposites through me, and remember, this is all a fabrication. The more I create myself as wealthy, smart, proactive, whatever positive qualities I brand myself with, the more frothy the waves on the surface of the ocean in our metaphor from earlier. That is all judgment achieves. From a certain perspective, it intensifies existence by individualizing, by making sharper the lines among kinds of beings. And so, it's not necessarily just survivalism that leads us to judge, but rather the desire to come into being as an individual being. Absolutely. to know myself as an individual separate from all other individuals. This is why the mind judges, so that it can create that distance, create that topography of different kinds, different degrees of selves. And so it is impossible to separate being as a whole from this desire to judge, from this habit of judgment. There are two levels of existence always. Level one is the oneness that I've spoken of in this video. There's the absolute mysterious unity of all things deep down. It is the source of all pleasure, all joy, all inspiration, all love, all peace. And it is always there. To borrow language from some of the religious traditions with which I began this video, it is almost as though it does not forget us, even though we may forget it. That is, its ever-welcoming, ever-enveloping embrace. So that is level one. Level two is the individual experience, which has been rendered in part so that unity or oneness may experience itself through us. So without severing off the individual being, creating that wounded, karmic, traumatized self, unity or oneness has no vantage through which to access itself. It is consciousness without an object, just this pulsation, this energy. With an individualized being like myself, oneness has a window onto itself. I interact with other beings. I interface with the world. I experience the objects around me. This is the purpose of our existence. It is a vehicle through which the absolute consciousness that we all share and are indebted to explores, experiences itself. And so from this perspective, even judgment is an enhancement of that. Even judgment, it's like turning up the calibration, the number of pixels on an HD television. Just makes the picture more lurid, more vivid. And so for me, knowledge is usually the cure. And what I mean by that is I don't offer techniques for how to stop judging. I can't. There was a brief period where I tried, but that's not really my way. I am more of a flower through experiences than I am a resistor, one who is going to try to stop, control, fix. A different way of putting this would be that I have very flimsy resistance. I easily give way. I'm like a reed that bends. I have a symbol of the same tattooed on my back, so you know I'm serious. So I don't seek to provide techniques for non-judgment, and neither do I seek to provide techniques for how to judge more thoroughly. You know, if you'd like, you can really sharpen your mind, you can enhance your vocabulary, you can study math, and you can truly become more intelligent than other people. in a rarefied way, and you can use that to castigate them and so forget your connection from them. You can do that if you want to, and that's another experience which consciousness can have on this earth. So, my purpose here, as in all of my videos so far, is merely to share the framework and trust that it will affect you and you will be affected by it as you are meant to. And I'm going to go get my darn coffee, and that's all I want to say in this video. So, as always, thank you for listening.